Welcome back to Music and Mind, the interview series where I, Adam Ficek, speak with leading musicians about the intersection of music and mental health. Today, I'm joined by the fantastic Bnann. Hi, Bnann. What are you up to musically right now?
Well, it's a really good time for me at the moment. We've had an album released from Tommy yesterday. Where are we? We're on Friday, which has had really good reviews and is looking like it's going to do really well. We did a Toby Lee album, and that's just won an award with the American Music Awards, and it's just topped the iTunes charts, and like we were A-listed on Radio 2 right now. So like that's been good. And then I went to see another act that I'd done a song for called Blue Violets, and that was a really good album launch at the weekend. So I'm in one of those purple patches where there's lots of things coming out and it's going well. And as all musicians know, it's just a matter of time until it's not going well again. So we enjoy these moments for as long as they last. So yeah, I'm writing and producing is my main thing now. And then I'm also going out live in Tom Meehan's band, playing guitar. Oh, I just got a call yesterday saying that Rhinoceros, who I guest frontman for, said, oh, we're back on. We're going to be going back out in October, and I'm frontmanning again. And I'm a little bit like, I haven't done that since lockdown. How do you practice being a frontman?
There's a lot going on. What do you prefer?
Oh, it's interesting you say that. I think stage is my happy place. Like, I don't have that feeling. The more people, the merrier, like when it's big crowds, I feel more relaxed than when it's small crowds. And when I'm on stage, I feel like that's kind of where I belong. And the other place is just in writing songs and producing. Like I love writing with people, you start off with nothing and then trying to find something that everyone in the room gets really excited about. And sometimes it takes a lot of, oh, how about this? And everyone's like, no. And then you come with another idea that you're really excited about and people are like, no. And then you get one that everyone's like, oh, God, yeah. And you're like, that kind of thing of backwards and forwards and collaborating. I really love that. So, yeah.
Going from nothing at all to actually creating some kind of artifact sounds really exciting.
Yeah. And if everyone's jumping up and down in the room, then you sort of got a chance of it coming out. And then if it comes out, you've got a chance of some people liking it. So you're sort of always working till you get that thing in the room where everyone's like, oh, God, this is great. This is really exciting. Sometimes that can take you writing an awful song first together. And then you go to lunch, everyone knows you've written a kind of average song. And then after lunch, I'm brave enough to be like, should we do something else? So we get it. So it's cool.
Yeah. Do you ever feel pressure?
I mean, it's interesting. With music, I feel like the only pressure is that I've got to try and make money from it. And that is harder and harder in this modern day and age. So the only pressure is that I've got to pay the mortgage. But the actual pressure, I'd never feel pressure of making music. I'm really comfortable in my philosophy that it is just music. We're not cutting off the wrong arm. We play music, and we go in and we do the day and we try our best, and I'm desperately wanting it to be amazing. But if something isn't as good or you don't click with people, that is fine, it's not a thing. And when record companies are like, we need a big single, we need this, or, they kind of give you the pressure. It's funny because it's like, the truth is it's a process. You've got to write 5 songs to get one that's really special. It's a numbers game. There's no point in being like uptight. And I think the moment you're uptight is the moment you stop being creative.
Yeah, it's a great philosophy. So you've said there the amount of money, or it's getting harder to generate income. Have you seen that shift over your time in the industry?
I mean, it's a massive shift. Like when I first started as a songwriter, I was always an artist as well. But when I first started being a professional songwriter, it was a funny job. Like, a friend of mine was like, oh, my friends own a progressive house label and they need hooks. And I was like, all right, cool. So I went in the room and it was like that famous Family Guy sketch where I was like, what are the chords? And they're like, no, none of that. And so they're just writing, you're writing hooks over one sort of, it's like a bass line that doesn't move, essentially. That was progressive house. And so I'd be writing hooks over that either I'd sing or someone else would sing or whatever. And those guys used to sell, and they were an underground, tiny little thing called Samsonic. They used to sell 25,000 copies of each release, vinyl, 25,000 copies. And they used to pay me a good amount to like do the session. And then I'd keep publishing. Publishing wasn't a thing really, because they were like, they weren't like radio. So they weren't radio kind of records. They were very, very cool and underground. But it taught me how to write hooks over things that don't move. And they would pay me good money. They'd pay me for the day, and then they'd sell a load of copies. And I was like, their little cottage industry, if we were selling 25,000 vinyl now, we'd all be overjoyed. And they were doing that as a tiny, tiny little label. So fast forward to now, it's very hard to make it as just a songwriter, just being a songwriter now. I mean, I've got some friends in the songwriting community that have written some very, very, very big hits, and they're struggling, that's odd. And then there's, the songwriting side of things is nobody wants to pay you for your time. Hilarious. Or that's what they used to do. And it's all performance related. And you've got a really simple thing that goes on. What used to happen is when we used to write songs, mostly if it was a good song, record companies would take it to radio. And then if it got played on radio, you would get royalties. Now the model is record companies, when it's a great song, stick it out on Spotify and to stream first, wow, which doesn't get us any money. And then if it's doing okay on streaming, it might have got like, let's look at some numbers like, songs that are doing sort of 6 or 7 million streams. And they're like, well, we're not going to bother taking it to radio. It costs us too much money. So the songwriter has lost everything because the songwriter's not got any major royalties. They're not bothering to take it to radio because they're waiting for things that are doing sort of 50 million or blowing up on TikTok or whatever before they push the button, because it's all measured metrics. So a songwriter now's royalties, they're hardly there, because they're not using the same model of going to radio. And they do obviously sometimes, like with, but it's just, that's the model is very, very different. And you've got that. And then this reluctancy, there was a thing where all the songwriters got together and said, we should be paid for our time, or we should be part of the master rights, because without us, there isn't any song and there isn't any master. It's not against the producers. We weren't saying we wanted the producers to give a share. We wanted the labels to do it. And of course, all the labels like, nah, don't pay for songwriters. So, and then my friends would say to me, my friends who are other creatives who are like illustrators or whatever, like, what do you mean you go in, you do a day or 2 days and no one gives you any money? And I was like, yeah, it's all about whether we get something on radio. And they're like, no, but how does this, and it became very simply unsustainable for a lot of us songwriters to just be songwriters. And so hence you sort of learn production and you learn to be a songwriter producer and you have other strings to your bow. Or I learned to DJ. Like, I used to DJ a lot pre-lockdown. And someone's paying you a load of money to press a button. And you're like, I can't believe this. I mean, we all know DJing is about reading the crowd. And, most musicians, I would say, have empathy for crowd and are good DJs because they go, oh, people want a tune like this. I've got a tune like this. We understand that. We want people to have a good time. But the fact is that people would pay me a load of money to DJ in a tiny club and they wouldn't pay me to go into a songwriting session and I'm an established published songwriter. It's kind of hilarious, isn't it?
It's very skewed, isn't it? It's very skewed. So I didn't realise that was the extent. I had the assumption that songwriting was on par with the live stuff, but it sounds like the live stuff is far more beneficial financially.
I think now it's changed slightly. Like, for instance, with me, like when we're working with some people, we do charge for our songwriting days because we're like, why wouldn't we? And also, like where we do the production stuff, what's interesting for a producer, when you've done the production, you've got paid, and then what happens after that is up to record companies and people to promote, but you've been paid. So when you've done your production, you've done your job, and everyone's been like, okay, great, thank you very much, you've been paid, here we go. Whereas if you were just a songwriter, not getting paid, and it's all performance based, that's a lot of pressure, isn't it, to know that your life is completely performance based, and if you're doing something well, people are really loving you, and if it's not going well, no one remembers you. That's our industry.
Yeah, so that's spec work, and it's based on the last gig, as it always has been. What are you? Where's the commercial gain in the previous stuff you've done? It's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that side of it's pressure. There's been times where all of us as freelancers, we've had something lined up that then's fallen through in your life, and you could end up suddenly in big trouble. You know, oh, I had this tour or this contract that I was about to do, and then it's all fallen through, which it does. You know, we've all been in situations where we're about to sign a contract for something we're involved in, then the lawyers are like, yeah, we're signing it on Monday, and then on Monday it's like, oh, they've decided to pull out. That happens in our industry. It just does. And, you know, I have had that happen pre-lockdown where I was absolutely broken skin, and I was like, what am I going to do? And I needed money, and I had to go out and sort of do deliveries, like, because that month I'd been counting on this money and it just didn't come. Now it's much better, and I'm in a much better position, and royalties and stuff are better, and, you know, things are okay. But it's always a thing of, it swings and roundabouts, and we never have security, I would say. You know, I've got lots of friends who've had number ones that are not secure.
Yeah, I find that, do you prefer energy wise the songwriting stuff, or do you find the touring difficult? How do you find that?
Well, I mean, when I've got two children, one is 14, one is 11. So when the kids were younger, I kind of stopped touring as much. You know, Infidels had kind of come to a kind of, we had a hiatus because of the fact that we had a dispute with Sony, but we're all still mates, and it kind of just lasted this hiatus. It was like, it was a fucker. We had a really good album come out, and we couldn't tour it, we couldn't do nothing. So we were sort of stuck, and then it came in line with my kids being young, and so I was just writing for people, and I didn't tour. And then I'd do the odd thing with, as you know, as time went on, then I'd do the odd thing with Rhinoceros, where I'd go out and do festivals in Spain and stuff like that. And then it was weird, because when I met Tom again, and we started doing his first album, as we were doing it, he turned to me and said, you know, I need you to come out live with me, don't you? And I was like, what do you mean? And he was like, I'm not going out without you. I need you to play guitar for me, and I need you to be there, because, you know, I haven't been on stage, you know, this is a thing. And he said, so you're coming, aren't you? And I realized that without asking my wife or saying anything to anyone. I was like, yeah, of course I am. And then I came home and said to my wife, oh yeah, I think I might do this. And her reaction was amazing, because the kids were older, and her reaction was like, yeah, that is who you are. That's part of who you are. So of course you're going to do that, and we'll juggle it. And it's not always easy, because I'm now away on tour, and I'm away when I'm working in the studio, because my studio partner and me are based in Cornwall. I live in London. So there's a lot of juggling, and there's a lot of, oh, you can't, you know, you're not going to be here for my son's football match sometimes, or like my daughter is also sort of studying drama and stuff just at the weekends. She's only 11, but, you know, shows of hers. And I have to kind of say to her, look, I'm really sorry, but when you are a performer, you do miss weddings, you do miss things. It is part of what will happen to you if you become a performer. So it's a juggle. But like my wife always says, I'm happy when I'm making music and playing music, and I'm a different guy when I'm not. And I'm not very easy to live with when I'm not. So I think she's like, this is the lesser of two evils, you know, and your children can come and watch you.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Be a part of it as well.
Yeah. That's been a real revelation, because my son, who sort of acts like he's not interested in music, will come to the gigs and be jumping up and down and trying to get in the mosh pit. And then afterwards it's like, I'm cool for a day. One day only.
Where did it all begin for you? Kind of take me back to your early foray into music making.
So I had a thing where this is odd. I don't know why this happened, but I was obsessed with two things. Football. I wanted to be a professional footballer, which I think a lot of people do. And then I had an obsession with Elvis when I was a kid. I don't know why, but just absolute obsession. And when I watched him now, I'm still like, oh, wow. 69 comeback, you're still like, wow. I had this mad obsession with Elvis. And then I was at school, like sort of trying to have a quiff and trying to do all that thing. And I was odd because everyone else was starting to get into madness. Then I got into madness at school and I loved that kind of two-tone thing. And I was like, this is great. And then I just kind of was one of those people that was in front of the mirror as a kid, pretending to be a singer and doing all that stuff. And then when I was like, I was obsessed with trying to learn the guitar. So got to 13 and I was like, I got a guitar and I started trying to learn stuff. And then there was a guy that my mum had seen in the guitar shop, sort of £5 a week, £5 a lesson to learn guitar. And I used to do a Saturday job and get paid £5. And so I took this £5 and he'd come on a Sunday and he'd basically show me some things. But what happened was he was like, oh, you're quite a good, you're taking to it quite well. But I immediately became obsessed with trying to write songs. I don't know why. Quite odd, because I'd been obsessed with trying to be, some incredible guitarist. But I stopped trying to do that and started writing. And then it just became a weird expression, I think. Like, we all have odd childhoods. I had a slightly odd childhood, broken home, all that kind of stuff. And so I think it was my place. Me and the guitar was my place of like, I just expressed myself. And that's odd, isn't it? But it's great because I say to my kids now when they say I'm bored, I'm like, learn an instrument, you'll never be bored again, And so this kind of obsession with songwriting and just writing, and then wanting to still be a singer. I really wanted to be a singer. And then by the time I was sort of 14, I got in a cover band and we did someone's wedding and we did a horrendous version of, various songs that we were doing Eric Clapton's Cocaine when we were like 14, which is just people at the wedding were like, what the fuck is going on? Why are these kids on stage? And it wasn't very good, but we did our best. And then I was in cover bands, and then you do these things where you'd be like, oh, Simon's dad can tune a guitar. Where does he live? Oh, he's a 2-mile walk up the road. Let's get up there. And he also knows how to play Blackbird. All right, let's get up there. And you'd knock on the door and be like, oh, can you teach us Blackbird? And strangely, in those times, people were like, yeah, here, give us your guitar. And they'd do it. And no internet and stuff. And then we had a record shop where I lived, and there would be bands. I was like, oh, my God, that's so cool. So fast forward to then I get to sort of the age where I'm like going into bands locally in Norwich, where I come from. And you realize you're not meant to be in a cover band. You're meant to be in an original band. If you want to do something, that's what you're going to do. So, of course, we was in grunge bands. We thought we were all Kurt Cobain. And, you emulate first, don't you? That's what you do. You totally emulate. So we were all in these grunge bands. And funnily enough, my old band member from that time was laughing, and he sent me photos because what happened to us was mental. I would have been 16 at the time, and we was in a grunge band, and Pulp came through. Before they were signed, they were not anything, and they came through, and they basically were the headline act at the Norwich waterfront where we were supporting. And we were like, oh, we're amazing. And they walked in with all their crushed velvet on and looking really 70s. And we were like, I mean, that's just weird. Everyone was kind of a bit like, that's a weird. And I was thinking in my head, that's so brilliant. They're wearing it off stage. They're really committed. They're really doing, it's different to what we're doing. We're fake and they're the real deal. The penny dropped. And when they did the show, Jarvis stood on stage, and for the first song, he just peeled an orange slowly. So all my kind of grunge frontman, let's jump around, swing our hair about, was so shit compared to this guy was completely original, peeling an orange while the song was going on and didn't move, just peeled this orange. And then they went in, and the first song that they played was Lip Gloss. They were totally, they were signed, but they were signed to a shit label and they couldn't get out of the deal. So you'd never heard of them. And I just stood there thinking, oh my God, what am I doing? Like, what are we? And I think we all had the same realization, like, we're not actually the thing. So, you know, we kind of had a real education by Jarvis and Pulp. And then, you know, it must have been about 5 or 6 months later, they were on The Word doing Lip Gloss, and they had a new deal, and then the rest is history, as they say. So it was a good lesson in like what's going on. Plus, I'd become a big band locally. Skip forward to a couple, like another year. I was in a big band locally, and realizing that didn't mean anything, you know. Like I moved in with some older musician guys. I got kicked out of my house because I was a nightmare. My mum kicked me out. Then I went to my dad's. Then my dad kicked me out, and I was a total nightmare. And then the only people that took me in were my fellow. I was in a band called the Splendids, and the guys were older, and we were doing original stuff. And they were like, "You can come and live in a room." And when I got there, there was 2 other guys that were in bands, and one of them was in a signed band. And he was in a signed band called Stare, and they were signed to Big Life Management and BMG Records. And he was a guy that owned a local studio. And these guys, I would have been sort of 16, 17, and they would have been like 22, 23, maybe 24. They just educated me. They were so good, because I remember going to Hammy, who was the lead singer of Stare, and they was on Radio 1 at the time, you know. It was a big deal, you know. And I remember going to him and saying, "Oh, my bass player's left, and I don't know what I'm going to do." And he was like, he said, "How many bands have you had?" And I was like, "Well, this is my first band, but second person who's left." And he was like, "Listen, you're going to have about another 10 bands before you find people who are the real deal. And also, when are you leaving? When are you leaving Norwich? And when are you going to actually do something?" So, you know, it was really good. And he was like, "And why do you pretend you're from America? Like, why are you doing grunge music? How's it anything to do with you?" And they would literally just really give it to me. The other one, amazing. Like, I was hounding him to give me his manager's number. I was hounding him, right? Saying, "Give me your manager's number." And in the end, after a couple of weeks, he just went, "Right, I'm going to give you my manager's number." And the manager, he'd obviously said to the manager, like, "This kid's all right. We need to help him out." Manager goes, "Oh, I hear you want to speak to me." I'm like, "Yeah." He goes, "Right. So yeah, what's the situation then?" He goes, "How many people do you play to in Norwich?" And we were like, I'm lying, going like, "What, like, 200?" And it's like, and we probably could get like 150 people in local band vibes, And he was like, "Great. How many people do you play to in Cambridge?" And I was like, lying, not been to Cambridge. And I was like, "Yeah, like 200." And he was like, "Right." And he goes, "Which venues?" And I'm like, and then he goes, "And how many people do you play to in London? And how many tours have you done?" And then I just slowly start unraveling. And then he says, "And how many fanzines have you been in?" And I just, after a minute or so, he's like, "You haven't done any of this, have you?" And I was like, "No." And he was like, "And how many vinyls have you released yourself and put together?" And I was like, "None." And he was like, "Listen, Steve told me to do him a favor, so I'm talking to you." He goes, "This is how it works, Bnann. If you want management, you need to have a buzz going and you need to create currency. You cannot just be a local band." He said, "When you go to local things, there's a local band like you in every city pretending to be Nirvana. There's hundreds of them. You are just another one of those. You have to, build a fan base, and you need to be more true, and you have to do all these things before any decent manager is going to be tall And they will come to you when you create a buzz, not you coming to them. Because we'd done the thing of going up to London, trying to drop tapes in at management companies, and the receptionist would be like, yeah, I'll give it to him. Off you fuck. Like, it was just so funny. So then after that, great education, I came to London with the idea of like, right, that's it. I've got to do it. And I was 20 at that time. A guy I lived with who was another older guy who'd been a singer, I was talking to him saying, I just want to go to London, you know, and he said to me, if you want to go to London, I'll drive you there tomorrow. He went, tomorrow, right? Find someone in London, crash on the floor, I'll drive you there tomorrow. If you do that, you'll know how much you want it and I'll respect you. If you don't do that tomorrow, don't ever talk to me about how you want to make it in the music industry again, because I'll know you're just another local wannabe that's not willing to actually do it. And at this time, I was a bit too much involved in drugs, and I was, you know, a local hero in my mind, you know, big fish in a tiny pond. And I thought, fuck it. So I phoned up the only guy I knew in London, said, can I crash on your floor? And he said, yeah, when you coming? I was like, tomorrow. He was like, what do you mean tomorrow? I was like, I'm coming tomorrow. So I arrive in Stratford. Me and him, he'd already been another musician that had come. Me and him started a band called Green Ship, and we had two other people. His brother played drums, and then we had a situation where we met a bass player. And when we put the advert for a bass player in, we said we wanted someone who could have the melodic structures of McCartney and the rhythm of Bootsy. And what was interesting was there was a guy, a manager, that had read this in the NME on the Melody Maker and phoned us and said, what's your band sound like then? And we said, oh, we want to sound like this, that, and the other. And we had, you know, we had kind of interesting sort of influences. And we had rules. The three of us lived in a one-bed bedsit. And the two of us weren't allowed to, we had to wait until we could go use the bathroom because we weren't meant to be in this bedsit. But we had a rule where we pooled all our money together, no girlfriends. And we were like, we're going to do this. And me and Herb sat there and wrote hundreds of songs. And eventually we kind of did a demo, and we'd sent it to this manager who was like, you know, what's your thing sound like? We sent it to him, and he loved it. And he said, oh, are you doing gigs? And we had a really interesting thing again, where the first week when I'd been in London, and I was coming off of being a cocaine addict, we basically went to the Camden Underworld, and we saw a band. They were called the K's, and they had everything. They looked really 60s. They were absolutely amazing. Everything, harmonies down. The guitarist was spectacular. Frontman, he was great. You know, they looked the part. They sounded the part. And we were like, fuck me, that's the level. This is London. That's the level. You need to have your concept. You need to have your songs. You need to have your performance. So that had kind of, in our first week, that's what we're aiming for. That band was actually Cooler Shaker.
Yeah, went on, yeah, with Chris.
Yeah. And it seemed to us like 2 minutes later, they were like number one in the charts. I know Paul and them now, so it's nice. But they were the inspiration. We were like, that's the level. You know, we weren't doing that kind of music, but we were like, that's the level you've got to be at. So we did this thing called Green Ship. We did this demo. I'd written a song called Down Too Soon, which was this manager, Nick, who'd just asked us about a bass player, heard it and thought it was great and sent it to a couple of other people. And it was so odd. I'm not joking. We did one gig where he said, can I come? And he brought a couple of people. And we brought our mates up from Norwich. You know, we was in the garage. I think we probably had 75 people in the garage, you know, which we thought we were doing really well. But him and a couple of other industry people walked in, and we were doing this thing, and we were dressed in a certain way. I mean, at the time I had kind of black hair all feathered in. We had very odd clothing. We had our whole concept, and we were kind of doing Radiohead meets Jeff Buckley was what we were at the time. And they loved it. And they were like, oh, wow, this is so good. And somehow someone else had known that Nick was going, this guy from Independiente, and walked in because he knew Nick was going. And then he'd gone back to Andy McDonald and said, this band are absolutely the nuts. Somehow that had got round that we got a phone call saying, Andy McDonald wants to come to your rehearsal room. We were like, all right, cool. We knew nothing. But we were like, yeah, tell him to come. Who is he? He's a record company guy. We were like, okay, cool. So he comes in the rehearsal room and basically he's just sitting there and just being lovely. And we do the show, we sort of do a sort of showcase for him. And then he leaves and then we don't think nothing of it. But the guy who runs the rehearsal room is like, do you boys know who that is? And we're like, no, he's some guy that Nick knows. And it's like, there's been a Rolls Royce waiting outside for him the whole time. And he's Andy McDonald in Independiente. And he told us all about Go Beat. And we were like, oh, is it? Anyway, from that, the whole industry decided that they wanted to be at our next gig. And I'm not joking. And we got phone calls every day for about 3 weeks from a different major label saying, oh, we hear you're the Green Chip and we want to talk to you. Now, we were stoners and we had our own language. So when they'd phone up and they'd say, we'd want to speak to the Bnann from the Green Chip or Herbie from the Green Chip, we'd be like, yeah, but are you green? And they'd be like, what? And we'd be like, yeah, but are you on the ship though? Because we can't speak to you unless you're on the ship. And they thought it was brilliant. And we were just taking the piss because we were stoners and we didn't think they were real. We thought it was a wind up. This created this massive buzz. Our second gig had 26 labels at the Camden Falcon. I don't know if you remember the Falcon.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we played it and it was absolutely filled with like A&Rs and we created this massive buzz. Cut a long story short, we signed for shitloads of money in 1994, 95 for shitloads of money. Next thing that happened was we all became drug addicts again. I mean, like recreational, nothing too hard, but we were just party animals. We were just real party animals. And we thought we'd made it because someone had given us a load of money. We were in deals and we thought we'd already made it. We didn't understand that's the start of things. So we just kind of fucked around. And of course, I went from doing a Melody Maker tour to delivering letters for the post office.
Wow.
That kind of thing where we had a good year and a half. We had all this money. We thought we were rock stars. We went on a tour. Our record sold out. It was great. Then our record company, the person who signed us got sacked. It's the classic story. The only person that speaks to you is the receptionist, goes, all right, boys. Everyone else is walking past you. And you have your first taste of how it feels to get dropped. So after that, I had a situation where I was like, I made a pact with myself. I'm going to clean up, one, and I'm never going to allow myself to go to a festival until I'm signed and playing it. This took me 7 years.
Wow.
And that was Infidels. We got together. We'd all been signed and dropped in different bands, all of us. And so we all had the same experience, and this time we were serious about it, and we'd all cleaned up our acts, those of us who had problems, and we were like, when we do get signed, we will know it's just the start of the work we've got to do, and we had a different attitude. So that's the kind of the story of how I kind of got to being properly professional with a lot of near misses,
Yeah, you're such a veteran then of that whole journey.
Yeah. And the journey was so good, like from the guys who'd taught me, like, stop pretending to be Kurt Cobain, that I lived with when I'd show them my new song and be like, listen to this. And they'd be like, it sounds like it's off Nevermind. And I was like, no, it doesn't. And they were like, and they were in indie bands that were very English and very Britpop, Can you imagine a young 16-year-old who thinks he's the nuts and he's just bringing you this, So they were really good to me in the fact they were so harsh, and I'm friends with them still.
Yeah, but that advice, and it was quite brutal, but
yeah,
it really set you up for that trajectory.
Yeah, and it's something that we did use to our advantage throughout our lives. In Infidels, we used to call it the harsh news flash, which was give it to us brutally, because once we know what happens brutally, we can work around it. So, you know how it is in band. You go, oh, how's it going at radio? Oh, you've got XFM, but Radio 1 won't play you at the moment, or whatever it might be. We'd just get the brutal, harsh flash. We'd say to managers, do not sugarcoat it. Why won't they play us? Oh, they don't think you're right for this. Okay, so we know what we need to work on now. They think we're one thing or whatever. And, we batted down all those doors by having the harsh news flash, being like, give it to us brutally, because then we can work with it. And I'm still like it now, where I'm like, I don't want you to sugarcoat it because it doesn't help me. The problem is I'm like it when I give other people advice, and that's not always good.
I'm ready for it sometimes.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty steely at taking a kick in the balls. Do you know what I mean? I'm all right. I can do it and then come back. But I live by. I mean, I had Jazz Summers, who was my manager for a while when I first came. I mean, he was brilliant, absolutely brilliant, but brutal as anything. Because when I came out of Infidels and I started being a professional songwriter, the first people who signed me was Big Life as a writer. And Jazz was one of the scariest and most charming people I've ever met. And we'd be writing downstairs in the studio, and he'd come in after lunch and he'd listen to he'd go, right, play me what you've done. And there'd be three of us writers in there writing for something or writing with an artist. And he'd go, who wrote that bit? And you'd have to say, it was me. And he'd either say, that's fucking terrible. How's a white band man going to understand that? Like, how's someone going to deliver in soft drinks going to understand what you're talking about? What a load of absolute bollocks, he'd say. Or he'd say, that's brilliant. But each time you had to put your hand up and be like, I wrote that bit. So there was no hiding with him. And he would say things to you like, listen, if you want to make fucking jazz albums, you can make them once you've had some hits. You're in here to be a hit songwriter. Stop fucking around and get it done. But equally, when I had the problem with Sony, he got me out of it because no one else could get me out of it. No lawyers. I heard him in the office in front of me. He goes, what's happening with that thing? And I said, I can't get out of it. And he said, I'll get you out of it. Watch me. And I was like, what's he going to do? And no word of a lie, on the phone, he phoned up the head of Sony and he goes, when are you going to get Bnann out of this deal that you've got him in, this awful publishing deal? And the guy at the other end of the phone, who was a big guy, said, well, a contract's a contract, isn't it? Isn't it, Jazz? So he's not going to get out of it. And Jazz said, a contract's a contract. What I'm going to do is I'm going to print your contract in Music Week for the next 6 weeks until you fucking release him, because it's a shameful contract and you know it. So are you happy for me to print it? And I will fucking print it. And then I will poster it up around every single industry place. I'll poster it up at the ground. And the guy just literally and he goes, and then I'll put you in a headlock myself until you, and he was just brilliant. And literally about 2 days later, I came in, he goes, I've got you out of it, Bnann. I was like, so he was a guy that would be harsh to you, but would fight for you. And he was brilliant. And he was a good mentor in songwriting. The other person who was a good mentor in songwriting was when we did our Infidel second album with Youth. Youth would say things to me like, these songs don't have middle eights. And I'd be like, yeah, I don't think they need them. And he'd be like, yeah. And he'd say it like this, I don't think they need them. Like, that's how he'd talk to me when I'd say something back. And I'd be like, no, I don't. And he'd go, yeah, I don't. And I'd be like, Youth, I don't think. And he goes, right, tonight, write me middle eights for every single song and bring it to me tomorrow. So I'd go back the next day. I'd spend all night writing these things. I'd go back the next day and he would just ignore me every time I went to show him the middle eights. And I'd be like, can I show you these middle eights? And he'd be like, not now. Just like that. And I'd be like, but why? You're not busy, oh? Later. Anyway, later on, I show him the middle eights to each song. And he'd be like, yeah, that's great. He goes, that's great. That's great. I said, okay, cool. So when are we going to record them? Oh, no, we're not recording them. I was like, what do you mean? He goes, songs don't need middle eights. I just wanted to see if you could do it. And I was like, why is that? He said, because one day I'm going to ask you to write with me, and now you've passed the test. So he was brilliant, and he would pick me up on anything that he considered a rhyme crime. He'd be like, what are you actually saying there? Or are you just rhyming? He'd speak to you like that. And I was like, what the hell? I'm saying, and he would catch me out, and he'd be like, you're not saying anything, are you? What are you trying to say? So during that second album of Infidels, he taught me loads. And then later on, I did end up writing with him. And he told me some people need the carrot and some people need the stick. You're a people pleaser. So I acted like I was never impressed because it made you work really hard. And he said, you'll find this out when you work with other people. And I do use the same technique to this day. I work out psychologically if the person needs to be pushed or nurtured.
Yeah.
A lot of people come in the studio, and the more unimpressed you act, the more they work hard. And others don't. Others don't respond to that. And youth called it the cup and the sword. And he said, you're a people pleaser. So you're like McCartney, where you just constantly want to do something that makes everyone excited.
How amazing. What an education you've had.
I know, it's mad, isn't it? It is I've been really lucky. And that's just what I'm saying. It's always been brutal.
Mm.
And I feel really lucky about that, because I've taken it into my own work practices of not being brutal, with people, but working out what is needed and trying to get people to open up their channels. When you're trying to write or produce, you're trying to get everyone in the room to open up their channels and feel relaxed, creative, or if they're a people pleaser, feel like they need to work harder.
What does the future hold for you?
So right now we're going to be doing more writing production for various people. We're working with artists right now that we've got going on. I think there's, like I say, Rhinoceros will be back out there. Tom will be back out there touring. And then I'm trying to focus, Adam, because I would do 7 million solo projects. And my wife said, you need to focus. So I'm focusing on Shadowhands, the writing and production thing. But I wouldn't put it past me to do something else. I've got 2 projects in my mind. One is a sample-based project called Be Infidelic, and another one is a kind of epic thing called Skyway Tufts. So these are 2 things I'm working on at the minute, which may never see the light of day and may just be good for writing songs, but they're 2 things that may come out if I'm allowed to not focus. But I think focus is better for me.
Thank you very much to Bnann. Thanks for listening to Music of Mine with me, Adam Ficek. Make sure you check out the Tonic Music website for free groups, workshops and courses for both music fans and those working in the music industry.